With April 2nd closing in, Canada has done something rare. It sent a formal strategic plea to the United States, asking them to back down from a new wave of tariffs before things spiral even further. It's not just policy on the line. This is about farms, factories, and millions of jobs caught in a growing economic storm. On March 11, 2025, Canada submitted a detailed, urgent response to the U.S. Trade Representative. The message? Clear and diplomatic, but firm. Don't do this. The backdrop is already tense. China's tariffs on Canadian goods have slammed seafood, pork, peas, and canola oil. The U.S. is now preparing its own round of retaliatory tariffs, set to go into effect on April 2nd. And Canada, trapped in the middle, is trying everything to stop the second front from opening. This letter isn't just words. It's a breakdown of why Canada believes the U.S. would be hurting itself, its own workers, and its closest trade partner by going forward with these tariffs. It lays out just how interwoven our economies are, and why retaliation makes no sense. So in this video, we're going to break down what Canada said, line by line, and why it could be one of the most important diplomatic documents you haven't heard about. Canada's big argument. We're not the problem, we're your best partner. At the core of Canada's letter is one key message. Don't treat us like the enemy. We're not China, we're not the threat. In fact, Canada argues, we're the exact opposite. We're the best trade partner America has. Let's look at the numbers they laid out. In 2024, Canada bought $348.5 billion in U.S. goods. That's more than China, Japan, and Germany combined. Canada is the #1 customer for U.S. merchandise exports. Add services into the mix, things like financials, IP, and tourism, and the U.S. racked up $90.3 billion in sales to Canada. In total, trade with Canada supports about 8 million U.S. jobs. The U.S. also runs a trade surplus with Canada when you remove energy products. That's right, the so-called deficit only exists because American refiners need Canadian oil and gas to power their economy. Strip energy out, and the U.S. actually came out ahead by $34.3 billion in goods and $34.9 billion in services. Manufacturing? Another win for America, a $23.7 billion surplus in 2024 alone. That's more than with any of its other top 5 trading partners. What Canada's saying is, we're not undercutting you. We're not gaming the system, we're making you stronger. Over 70% of what Canada exports to the U.S. is used as inputs for American products, raw goods that get transformed into made-in-the-USA cars, machinery, electronics, and more. That's not competition, that's supply chain collaboration. So, when the U.S. talks about cracking down on unfair trade, Canada's asking, why us? Why now? Instead of a one-way deal, Canada says the U.S. gets a partner who boosts its economy, supports its jobs, and actually follows the rules. And most importantly, this partnership was built under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, the USMCA, signed in 2018 under President Trump. That deal guarantees tariff-free trade for over 98% of all goods. Both sides agreed, and both sides benefit. Canada's message: we're already standing with you against China. Canada doesn't deny that unfair trade exists. In fact, the letter openly acknowledges it. Yes, countries like China use non-market practices, government subsidies, and forced labor to gain an edge. But instead of ignoring it, Canada says it's already taken real action. In October 2024, Canada imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese-made electric vehicles and a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum. These are the same sectors the U.S. is worried about. Canada acted decisively and did it before being asked. They didn't stop there. Canada is considering new tariffs on Chinese semiconductors, solar products, and critical minerals. The country even changed its clean vehicle subsidy rules. Now, only countries with free trade agreements like the U.S. can benefit. That's a direct move to isolate China from the North American EV market. And for steel, Canada now requires importers to report the country of melt and pour, making it much harder for Chinese steel to sneak into North America disguised through other markets. Only the U.S. and Canada do this. That's how tightly aligned the two countries are. The letter also highlights Canada's stronger foreign investment screening laws, aimed at blocking national security threats from countries like China. It points to a national research security plan, a tech export control system, and reciprocal procurement rules that shut China out of government contracts. In other words, Canada is saying, we're not just talking about fighting unfair trade, we're doing it, right alongside you. And if the U.S. hits Canada with new tariffs on April 2nd, that alliance gets shaken. Instead of working as a team, the U.S. would be punishing the one country that's already proven it's committed to the same economic security goals.
I want to just tell you, all the people, they're tough traders. They trade very tough. And, the expression I use is, some people don't have the cards. I used that expression about a week and a half ago, right? Somebody was negotiating who didn't have the cards, who's now, I think, saying that he wants to do it, and I think we're going to have a big deal on that very special something. We got to make a deal on that. But Canada has been a very nasty negotiator against the United States, took advantage of the United States for a long time. But nobody knows that they were getting 270% tariffs on dairy products.
Are you concerned that if they became the 51st state, they would be a very, very blue state? Very, very big and very, very blue.
No, there might be, but it would, you have that artificial line that goes, that straight artificial, that looked like it was drawn by a ruler. Somebody with I don't mean a ruler like a king, I mean like a ruler, this way. And it's just an artificial line that was drawn in the sand or in the ice. And can I tell you, Peter, just, you add that to this country, what a beautiful landmass, the most beautiful landmass anywhere in the world. And it was just cut off for whatever reason. It would be great.
We briefed premiers on this. We had an exchange of views on the situation with the United States, the tariff measures announced by China. And then the meeting turned to its focus, which was nation building. And that is the focus of First Ministers. It is nation building. Because together we can give ourselves more than any foreign government can ever take away. We can more than offset the effects of any U.S. tariffs by eliminating internal trade barriers alone. Removing barriers to the free movement of workers and goods and services would increase the size of our economy. This is an updated figure, by $250 billion. So that's the equivalent of more than $6,000 for every single Canadian. Canadians are going to decide who their next government is going to be. I trust Canadians to make those decisions. We'll have, I'm sure, a robust election campaign, and Canadians will make the choice. No foreign leader is going to determine who's best. One of the factors is going to be, in my judgment, who is going to be best for Canada.
Canada's clarifications. Let's clear the air on dairy, digital taxes, and finance. One by one, Canada's letter tackles the flashpoints head-on, especially ones that keep coming up in U.S. trade complaints. First up, dairy. Canada admits its dairy market is sensitive, but under USMCA, it opened the door in a big way. Since the deal was signed, U.S. dairy exports to Canada have grown from $728 million to $1.14 billion a year. That's a 45% increase. Canada is now the U.S. second largest market for dairy exports. And while the U.S. has brought up complaints about quota allocations, the letter argues that the system is working and that the overwhelming benefit goes to American producers. Meanwhile, Canada represents less than 1% of global dairy trade. In other words, we're not a threat. Then there's the digital services tax, another flashpoint. Critics in the U.S. claim it unfairly targets American tech giants. Canada's rebuttal? That's not true. The DST applies to any large company, regardless of nationality, that makes money from digital services used by Canadian consumers. That includes Canadian firms, too. It's not a tariff, it's not discriminatory, and it doesn't block U.S. companies from competing. Canada points out that it's part of a broader international conversation on how to tax the digital economy fairly. And it even engaged in official dispute consultations under the USMCA to explain its position in good faith. Next, internal taxation, like the GST. Some in the U.S. argue that Canada's goods and services tax acts like a backdoor tariff. Canada pushes back hard. This is a value-added tax used by 175 countries and recognized by the WTO as trade neutral. The GST applies equally to imports and domestic goods. It doesn't make American products more expensive, and most importantly, it doesn't apply to exports, which is standard practice worldwide. The U.S. itself has state-level sales taxes. This is just Canada's version. Finally, financial services. Canada highlights that 16 U.S. banks already operate in Canada, holding over $113 billion in assets and controlling 50% of foreign bank assets in the country. J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, Wells Fargo, they're not just welcome, they're thriving. Canada says it gives American banks the same treatment as domestic ones and follows all USMCA rules on financial services. In fact, it even suggests launching the long-proposed Canada-Mexico-U.S. Financial Regulatory Forum to deepen transparency and collaboration. The message here? Canada's not hiding anything, and it's not giving itself special treatment. It's playing by the rules, and it's open to even more cooperation, not less. Canada on steel and aluminum. We buy from you, we protect you. Why target us? Now we're into the heavy stuff, literally, steel and aluminum. If there's one sector that gets political fast, it's this one. For years, U.S. administrations have used steel tariffs as a tool to protect domestic producers. But Canada's saying that logic doesn't apply here. In fact, punishing Canadian steel and aluminum hurts the U.S. Here's why. In 2024, Canada purchased 37% of all U.S. steel exports, more than any other country. That's $5.5 billion in U.S. steel sales heading north. Canadian steel producers, in return, bought $1.3 billion in U.S. raw materials from places like Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Michigan. This isn't one-sided, it's deep integration. Many companies operate on both sides of the border, with supply chains that depend on a predictable, tariff-free environment. And on aluminum, the story's even more extreme. Canada provides 2/3 of the U.S.'s aluminum demand, and not just any aluminum. It's low-carbon, high-quality, and used by over 500,000 American workers in aerospace, automotive, defense, and construction. That raw aluminum is turned into high-value U.S. exports worth over $200 billion annually. Canada is also the #1 source of aluminum scrap, a vital ingredient in the American recycling and manufacturing ecosystem. And U.S. aluminum exports back to Canada? That totaled $3.2 billion in 2024, making Canada a major customer. But it's not just about trade volume, it's about shared security. In 2024, Canada imposed its own 25% tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum to stop unfair imports from flooding the North American market. It also strengthened anti-circumvention laws, bulked up enforcement staff, and rolled out smelt and cast monitoring to trace exactly where imported aluminum comes from. This is rare transparency, and it's something most countries don't offer. Canada's saying, we're not the back door, we're the firewall. So if the U.S. hits Canada with steel and aluminum tariffs, it won't be closing off a threat. It'll be cutting off its strongest ally in the fight against unfair imports. The risk? Wrecking integrated supply chains, raising costs for U.S. manufacturers, and shaking investor confidence on both sides of the border. At the very end of the letter, Canada strips away the data, the trade jargon, the legal references, and speaks plainly. The U.S. and Canada have one of the most successful trade relationships in the world. It's not perfect, but it's fair, balanced, and deeply intertwined, and most importantly, it's built on trust. That trust is now at risk. Canada warns that its ability to keep fighting unfair trade, to block subsidized imports, protect jobs, and invest in innovation becomes nearly impossible if it's being hit from both sides. China on one side, the U.S. on the other. The letter ends with a firm reminder. Canada doesn't want conflict. It wants cooperation. It stands ready to work with the U.S. to reestablish a stable, predictable trading environment and to defend both nations' industries and workers. We succeed together, or we fall divided. And with April 2nd just days away, the question is now on Washington's doorstep. Will it listen, Or will it light the next match in a war that no one wants?